Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Author Chat. Today I have Greg Van Eekhout. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. So, Greg, you've got a new release. We'll get to that in a second, but first let's talk about who you are and what you do and all that good stuff. So, you were born and raised in LA in neighborhoods with hippies, criminals, working people, and movie studios. So that's a unique background. And like many writers, you've done a number of things to put food on the table and keep a roof on your head. So you worked as an ice cream scooper or a dipper.
Yes.
And you're a political fundraiser, a comic book store clerk, a bookseller, bookstore assistant manager, educational multimedia developer, and a college teacher of English and multimedia development. That's amazing. So welcome and tell us about how did you go from dipper to sci-fi author? Like, what made you decide one day I'm going to be a sci-fi fantasy author? And
I always push out from different trajectories, but like a big part of it was having been a dipper. And a lot of those jobs, they were like gigs, they weren't like it was, the gig economy has been around for a long time. And I hated all those jobs. So part of it was become a science fiction author so I don't have to do those things anymore. So, and obviously it's not as streamlined as that. So I didn't know that I really wanted to be a writer, like in the sense that like, I know what writers are and I know what the job is and I want that job probably until high school. But I was always, like most kids, I was creative. I was like taking my action figures and you make up your own stories with them and you give them their own backgrounds and stuff like that. And I call that proto writing because it's like you're creating sort of things that are related to building stories. But, obviously like writing is like a real craft, just like anything else. But I was at least like banging like boards. I wasn't building like things, but I was banging boards together and playing with hammers and screwdrivers. So that's kind of the analogy. I particularly science fiction. For the longest time, I didn't know that there were stories that weren't science fiction and fantasy. I just thought, because like the stories the books I was reading and the comic books, I was really big into comic books, and that's really a branch of science fiction fantasy. The superpowers, there's aliens, there's androids. Yeah. And I was, watching Star Trek reruns, on Channel 5 KTLA in Los Angeles, California. And then when I saw Star Wars, that sort of really cemented it. So and it never really, except for a brief period when I took some creative writing classes in college, it never occurred to me to write anything other than science fiction and fantasy. And people ask me, there's, why do you write the stuff that you write? And there's like the answers that people have come up with before that are really good answers by, like looking through the lens of SF. It gives you a way to approach difficult subjects from a different perspective or like from a distance. But really, it's just because it's more fun. Like, I feel like you can tell any kind of story in science fiction and fantasy about the human experience. So if you can do that, and you can have aliens or kaiju or robots, like, why wouldn't you? It's just more fun that way.
Absolutely. And robots versus kaiju, if we can make that work too.
And like, heck, zombies versus kaiju. Like, who wins, a kaiju or like 6 billion zombies?
Hey, man. Listen, like the kaiju's got them hanging off of him, like flailing.
Yeah, and they're dead already. So, so they're just clawing at the rivets and the bolts. God, now that sounds cool and really frightening. But I didn't start really writing stories with proper beginnings and middles and endings and learning what a story was until high school, which is kind of when I decided like this is a job I would like to do. So that's when I started. I would go to the local conventions in LA, and if there were writers and editors talking, those were the panels I would go to because
that's such a good resource.
Yeah, well, and that was the only resource really at the time because you had that in, you had Writers Digest magazine, and would always have great advice like, don't write Xerox brand photocopier trademark. It's like that wasn't really helpful, but the panels were pretty helpful. And then I started submitting stories to like really kind of sketchy small press horror magazines. And by sketchy, I mean that I would get acceptances and then I'd never see the story because they would inevitably never last long enough to publish my story, let alone pay them. Oh yeah, I'm responsible for killing a lot of the small press horror magazines in the 80s and the 90s. That was me.
You were their curse writer.
Pretty much, like we accepted a story by Greg let's
Oof.
fold, yeah. The apartment where we're printing this up caught fire or whatever.
Asteroid strike,
Yeah. So but that was kind of like the long apprenticeship of just collecting the paper rejection letters with all the check marks. They'd have all the check marks, like everything from like, this came close, keep writing, to like dude, you don't even know what a story is. What are you doing? So, and you would judge your progress by like how good the rejection was, and practice the rejectomancy. Like, what does this really mean? It's like, what it really means? It means they rejected your story. Yeah. That's what it really means. If they didn't send you a check and an acceptance letter, it's a rejection.
Yeah. And we all get rejections, and I think that's something that aspiring writers need to realize. They're not alone. If you get a rejection, it's really not the end. It's really just a stepping stone to get where you need to be.
No, and it's like you're always going to get rejections, even when you're a professional publishing working writer, because it's going to be a rejection of maybe it's a book, maybe it's a rejection of you didn't get that TV option that you were in discussion over. Maybe the thing got to a certain point and then got derailed, or maybe you got rejected for the advance you wanted and you had to take a smaller advance. It's constant rejection. So I'm not saying grow a tough skin, because I think feeling is something we're allowed to do as writers and human beings. We're allowed to feel things and have emotions, but you have to kind of figure out how you're going to deal with that rejection, but it never goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. But on the flip side, neither does the joy, right? For when something good does happen, it just, I don't know about you, but for me, it just sustains me for some time. Anytime there's good news, you feel like you're surfing quite the wave.
Yeah, I'm about celebrating everything. I'm not discounting like, my natural psychological inclination is to discount everything. Like, I got this thing, but it's really not that important because reasons that I'm going to make up in my head.
Really, right.
So I'm trying to train myself like, I got a nice review. Have a cookie, or like, I just sold a book. Like, I can buy a nice pen or a ukulele or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, most of it is just sitting and typing. So when the good stuff happens, which if you made a pie chart of like how much is like work and then how much is like result, the result is a tiny sliver of that pie, but it's still your pie, and you should be allowed to enjoy it and eat it.
Yeah, somebody once told me that it's kind of like being an astronaut. It's like there's a whole lot of work and very little glamour, and that little sliver is the glamour of it, but everything else is like people don't see what else going on behind getting to that little sliver, and it's a pretty tasty sliver when you get it. So
and also most of it is work, and if you don't enjoy the work and if you only enjoy the sliver, then that's a big part of the pie during which you're not actually happy and enjoying your life, and then maybe that's not the greatest thing.
Yeah, probably not. And, because then, if you have like a one-hit wonder, well, then what, right? You have to keep going.
There were so many people I saw like in the sort of around 2008, 2010, maybe to 2012, when there was a huge YA boom.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden, debut authors were getting six-figure advances and big book deals. And for a lot of, and good for them, for a lot of them, that was it though. And they kind of expected like it was always going to be that. It was always going to be, I'm going to get the six-figure book deal. I'm going to get a lot of attention. And then when it came to writing like that next book or the next contract, a lot of them faded away. And I don't think it's not because they weren't working hard enough or they weren't good enough writers, but their lives went from what they expected to just be this like rocket ride to like, oh no, it's actually all that ground preparation,
right?
And just struggling to get out of like, Earth orbit, and it's hard, and it's not always fun, and the rewards and the outcomes are not always going to be spectacular and dramatic. So
perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Well, so like when you were writing, you talked about film, you talked about comics, and were there any other influence that you think shaped you a lot as a budding writer when you first started developing on these different skills?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the stuff you absorb and take in. There's the fuel, right? But at a certain point, everybody who is an audience member is taking in that fuel, but not everybody is going to take that fuel and create something new out of it. So
Right.
I don't know what that creative drive is. And I know that I had it, but I didn't have any skills to express it. Like I loved like drawing, but I wasn't good at it.
Yeah.
I could not express myself after a certain point, after that certain, like, I'm drawn like, my mommy and my daddy, and here's my dog. I could not really express myself with art enough that I felt like it could be something that people would want to share, would want to partake of, and maybe
I
give me
understand
money
very
for.
well. Yeah.
But so I spent a long time, like through middle school and high school, thinking I could maybe be like a syndicated cartoonist, like Gary Larson, and like the Bloom County kind of thing. And I noticed I was getting a lot of praise for the words, not so much for the actual drawings. And so the encouragement, the pats on the head meant something to me. So I
Yeah.
thought like, okay, well, this is something I can tell stories, or I can build something
Great.
using words. So I don't even know if that answers the question you asked. The way I look at writing, I try to use this metaphor. It's like woodcraft. So I've always used the analogy like you're building a birdhouse or you're building a rowboat, and you get to a certain point when you understand that you have to work hard enough that a bird can live in your birdhouse, can inhabit your birdhouse and be happy there, or that somebody can get in your rowboat and sail it and it won't crack apart into a million pieces. So that's where the creative drive kind of has to take a backseat to learning the craft of actually doing it. And if you are inspired enough to create, then you will learn the craft of like actually learning like how to put those boards together so that the boat doesn't spring a leak, or that it is at all like at least lake worthy, if not actually seaworthy. Right. So I don't know. I knew I always had this sort of vague, ill-defined creative drive, and it wasn't until writing that I found a way like these are my tools, these are my materials, this is the shape of the thing that I can figure out how to build.
Yeah. And then if it's the ship of Theseus and you have to kind of remake it and you don't know what it is anymore, well, then that's fine too, right? As your craft evolves and your work evolves, it doesn't quite resemble always what you first make, but
no, well,
some
yeah,
semblance, right?
Unlike a boat where you probably have blueprints and you're buying the materials beforehand, creating stories and books, like it's not actually a physical object,
right?
So it does completely morph and change, and you have to be more like the reed in the wind than like constructing an oak tree. This analogy has totally gone off the rails.
I'm cool with it. It's great, actually.
Yeah. But you have to be flexible to the vagaries of your own mind, and that is also part of learning craft, is like learning how to stick to a vision, but also learn when that vision has to sort of change and morph a little bit.
Very good. So let's talk about some of your works. You have written some really interesting books that range from, adult fiction to your latest book, Weird Kid. And so I actually have
my first
Code, which is by you. I just got it yesterday. And so is this one of your first published works?
It came out I started publishing short stories like I think my first story came out in 98. It was in an anthology called 365 Scary Stories.
Ooh,
it was I think it's not visible in the camera, but it is up on my shelf there. So yeah, it was 2 stories to that. I thought I was made, but it's 365 stories. They're pretty short, so they're flash fiction. And also, I think the pages should have been perforated so you could just take one to the toilet. I actually think that would have been a great idea.
It's a really great idea.
So I was publishing short stories in small anthologies, and then gradually some of the better, more, I hate to use the word prestigious, because are they really? But the prestigious magazines in our genre. Yeah. In my peer group were short story writers, and I felt like, this is great. I'm enjoying this. I could probably write short stories and be happy in my career forever. But then some of those jerks, my friends, started selling novels. It was rude. I mean, just rude. They didn't check in with me first if that was something that we had agreed we were going to do. So I was jealous.
Total FOMO, am I right?
Really FOMO, because like they had like this, like they didn't have to share a table of contents with anybody. It was their book. And in my head, like this was like the height of success.
Yeah.
So I went to a workshop called the Blue Heaven Workshop that was run by Charlie Coleman Finley, who just until recently was the editor of Fantasy and Science Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the revered and prestigious publication. So we were a bunch of short story writers who all wanted to do novels, but we didn't know how. None of us had written novels before. So we would get together on an island in the middle of Ohio where there was nothing to do but drink Brandy Alexander milkshakes. It was a weird island. Eat terrible fried food.
Awesome.
It was really awesome, honestly. Stand near the quarry while they were dynamiting gigantic like Volkswagen-sized pizza rocks. It was a lot of fun. And we also workshopped each other's, first 50 pages or more. And gradually over the course of a few years, we started selling novels and we became novelists. So I think I owe that to finding people that were at about my level and us figuring it out together. That was really motivating and really rewarding. And it's just really great because it's a fun thing you're doing with friends.
Exactly.
So I wrote a short story called Wolves Till the World Goes Down, which was about Norse mythology and Ragnarok. And I sold it to a Tor Books anthology, to Patrick Nielsen Hayden for the Starlight 3 anthology. And that story kind of kept churning in my head for years. I kept kind of coming back to it. And that's usually a sign for me. It's happened a few times that if a short story doesn't leave you, that there's more there, more to explore. So I wrote that as a novel. It took probably about 4 years, 5 years to write a very short novel because I didn't know what I was doing. And there were times where I threw away at least a full third of the novel and started.
I understand that one very well. Yes.
I think most first-time novelists have gone through processes like that. And because I'd sold some short stories that had been read by some editors, I was approached at a convention by an editor at Bantam House, or Random House. And she just said, if you ever have a complete novel, send it to me, which I did. And then she made me an offer. And I immediately looked at that offer and I was really excited, obviously, because it means like I'm going to be a published novelist. The advance was a little mess. So I wrote to my friend who had been edited by her previously saying that I got an offer. It's exciting. The advance is a little meh, but it's still exciting. And instead of sending that to him, I accidentally sent that to the editor. So,
oh my God.
So yeah, I thought like, well, that was a really short career. I managed to tank that efficiently. Good for me. I'm good at this. She was really nice about it though. And
oh, geez.
So then I actually.
Ooh, sorry. Hold on. Technical difficulty. Hold on.
Hear me?
You there?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So terrible. So she was okay actually with it. She wasn't.
You know what she did? She wrote my friend and she said, I think this was meant for you. Don't even tell Greg he sent this to me. He doesn't need to know. It's okay. I don't want him to feel bad. And of course, my friend being my friend said, dude, look what you did.
Oh God.
You're stupid. Yeah. I felt bad, but you can just laugh. You can just laugh.
Yeah,
and it worked out.
I mean, that's all you can do. So
it worked out okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
That book eventually came out. It was my first book. Not all of my books are still in print. This one still is. It actually earned out. It's, modest, but not hugely terrible advance, and it still earns me royalties. It's weird having a work out that is so old and is such baby me writer. There's so many things I would change about that book.
Oh yeah, I think we all think that about our first novels that are out there, right?
Yeah, like, just ooh, that's cringy. Or like, did I really say that? Oh no, why did I make that decision? So yeah,
like,
but it's oh, I know. But on the other hand, it's what got my novel career started. Right. So I guess
that's your foundation for being a novelist. So
yes.
And then, so after that, what were your thoughts? Did you think this was a self-contained thing and you were done, or did you eventually want to make a series of it, or what happened next?
It was, I do always with my books, whether I'm planning a sequel or not, whether I think there's a remote chance of there being a sequel. I like stories that have a clear definitive ending, but something that kind of just throws a rock over the next fence. Just so I like the idea that I could pick up the story or that there could be fan fiction that finishes a story, or just the idea that like I like the idea that the story is bigger than what is contained within the pages, that there was stuff that happened before the story and there's stuff that happens after the story. So in this case, I had heard that your first novel is going to tank and that everything you do will be a failure. So what you need to do is immediately change your name, change your genre, and rebrand. So I immediately
maybe move to Mars, you know.
If you can work that, yeah, just like go fugitive. Maybe plastic surgery. I don't know. So I while I was waiting for Norse Code to come out, because the publishing process is long and arduous and
labyrinthine, yes.
Yeah. So I knew it was going to be at least a year till like the book actually hit the shelves. I wrote a middle grade novel. So what I did not expect was that they would ask me not to change my name. So I've been Greg Van Eekhout all this entire time. If I knew that was true, I probably would have given myself a pseudonym that is easier to spell and pronounce and remember. So I did not do that. And that kind of started a different diverging branch of my career, the middle grade stuff. So, nuts and bolts stuff. This is a chat for writers. So what had happened with Norse Code is that Random House had the option on my next adult book. Okay. So that means they had the right of first refusal. I had to send it to them and then they could spike it.
Okay.
And they had to do that within 3 months, make a yes or no call.
Gotcha.
So I sent them an idea for another story. And instead what they said is, can you just give us 6 months until after the book comes out? So at this point, that's like another year that I waited for them to decide if they were going to buy the book or not. And my agent at the time was fine with that. And I feel like they were just waiting to see if sales on that first book were going to be successful rather than investing and taking a chance. So rather than them gambling on whether that book was going to be successful, I was gambling with my time by sort of stalling my adult writing career.
Like this was an albatross out there. Like
Right. And ultimately they decided like, no, we don't want another book from you. So
okay, then.
I could have kind of pushed the point and said, like, actually, contractually, you have to make a decision. And even if it's no, I would like you to make that decision now.
Yeah.
My agent canceled against that, but it basically means that I lost like a year of publishing time.
That's so frustrating because having an unanswered question is one of the worst things for me. I don't do well with that. I like definitive answers. I like concrete things. I like, tell me now. I don't care if it's bad. It's better than not knowing,
Uncertainty is like such a source of like anxiety and neuroses with writers, just like, and I kind of, but I learned a lesson. I learned there, it's like, if they're not sure, then the answer is probably going to be no. There's a strong chance. Yeah. So move on. So the proposal I gave them for the adult book, they ultimately turned down. Ultimately I sold that as a trilogy to Tor Books, and that did come out. So that worked out okay. But in the meantime, while I was waiting for them to make that call on was waiting for Random House to make that call on the follow-up to Norse Code.
Yeah.
I was writing middle grade books. So that's kind of why my career is kind of been shaped the way it is. Like it's about half middle grade and half adult. It's not something I ever planned. It wasn't like a career strategy move. It's just sort of reacting to what the circumstances were, kind of determined that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's good to be able to evolve, but it's also impressive that you can branch out and that you have that capability, because I'm sure, it's got to be exciting for you that you have a lot of different kinds of stories that you can tell, and there seems to be an audience for.
Well, what I discovered was that I really naturally like writing middle grade more. I have more fun doing it.
Yeah,
I am more in touch with that audience.
Polar star, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have any plans to go. Never say never. I don't have any plans to go back to writing adult novels anytime soon. I love the middle grade. And then just in terms of like dollars and cents, I always say you write for the love, but you publish for the money. The middle grade books so far, I've been paid more than the adult books, and they're shorter. So
you can actually produce more of them.
I can produce more of them, have a better time doing it, feel that I'm artistically fulfilling myself. And it's not that they're easier than adult novels, because they're actually harder, but they are shorter. And you cannot deny that it takes less time to write a short book than it usually takes to write a long book.
And so you have a new book, Weird Kid. It just came out.
I do have this.
There it is.
There it is. Look at this thing. It says Weird
So
Kid right there.
I want to hear about Weird Kid. It just sounds like such a great book. And I think it would really resonate with so many people of any age.
The main idea is that it's difficult to go from elementary school to middle school. It is a difficult transition. It was a difficult one for me. I think it's a difficult for a lot of people. Matt Groening, The Simpsons, Life in Hell, calls middle school the deepest circle of hell. And for me, that rang true. So it's for kids that are going to experience that, have experienced it, are experiencing it now. That's the central idea of the book. And the way I express that idea is the main character, Jake Wind, is he's got a bit of a Superman origin story. He's an alien kid who's ejected from his dying planet. And unlike Kal-El, Superman, he's not a superpowered Kryptonian. He's a shape-changing blob of goo. He's oozy. So he splat lands in the desert outside the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. He is found by a kindly couple who take him in. He adopts human shape. They raise him as their son. And he's got an okay childhood, but when he hits middle school, he starts losing control over his body.
Oh no!
He is no longer able to maintain. Yes, exactly. It's a pretty obvious metaphor. He starts losing his human-shaped integrity and starts morphing and blobbing, which is not only deeply mortifying and embarrassing to him, but he's terrified that somebody will find out, because as we do with alien blobs, we find them, we capture them, detain them, study them, and if possible, because this is capitalist America, we figure out how to monetize them.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So that's his threat. He makes a friend who is also weird in her own way, but deliberately. And unlike Jake, she doesn't care if anybody thinks she's weird. She's training to be a superhero, which is a weird thing to do, but that's what she's doing.
That's what you want to do.
Doesn't care if anybody thinks she's weird. So she's kind of a contrast, a different kind of weird kid. And they team up, become friends, and fight against the evil corporatized research organization.
I've been happy being friends with either of them. They sound pretty great to me. And I was a pretty weird kid. So
who amongst us wasn't? What I kind of this is not true of everybody, but one of the things I realized is, like, once you realize that everybody around you is weird and everybody is grappling with those feelings, life becomes maybe a little easier. So, I've been asked, like, what do I want kids to learn from this book? And like, I don't, honestly, that's not my deal. I'm not a teacher. I'm not even a parent. I'm not here to teach lessons. I'm just here to, like, tell stories and show and to model, like, certain situations of behavior and let kids reach their own conclusion. But if you had to make me say what to learn from it, it's like, be kind to yourself. And then if you see other people who are weird, who seem uncomfortable, who seem lonely, out of place, be kind to them. And won't the world be a much easier and better place to get through?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great lesson to impart from that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, like, I had learned it earlier, and I wish other people would learn it at some point in their lives.
I always had a soft spot because I was like the friend in Weird Kid. I was just unapologetically freak flag weirdo,
so cool.
In the middle of nowhere in East Tennessee, the weirdest kid, and so I anytime I saw a new kid come in, I was like laser focused on just saying, hey, you're cool.
That's awesome. Okay. So
that's just who I am. And like, cause I knew people thought I was weird and I would never, ever fit in fully. I just knew that. And so I just like, well, forget it. I'll help somebody else maybe, and that's all I could really do. And it was more fun that way.
You're awesome. I wish I'd known you when I was a kid. Cause
we would have had fun.
Yeah. Because that is the coolest kind of person to be. That, like, that is the person that I needed when I was in middle school, and I did not really encounter that person. So yeah, that's awesome.
Well, it seems to me that you've become that person, though. That's the impression I get from your books. That's what you're kind of saying, though. It's like, hey, you're cool. It's okay to be weird. So, and I think that's a wonderful message for kids to read. So
I hope so. A lot of writing for kids is almost sort of like thinking about how you would have parented or befriended or educated yourself.
Absolutely.
And again, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a parent, and I don't have moral lessons to impart, but I have a moral duty to treat my readers with kindness, if not always, treat my characters with kindness.
Oh,
And what I could learn is to treat other adults with the kindness with which I treat my hypothetical kid readers. So I still have room for improvement.
a challenge I can identify with that too. That's a hard one for me too.
It is a difficult time. There are times in the hardware store where I'm just like, man, maybe I should get a sledgehammer and test it out. And I'm trying to like purge that urge from my system.
It's hard, like it's hard to recognize like, oh, I'm giving my power away again. I got to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have our superpowers. We got to.
Or is it really so bad to fire up a circular saw and just, is it really? Yeah, it is. I guess that is pretty bad. So I grapple with the lessons that I'm trying to impart in my books. I grapple with those myself. And I think
I think we all do that as writers.
Books are sometimes just talking to yourself too. Sometimes they're just sometimes you're telling a story.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm the person that needs to get in the birdhouse, or I'm the person that needs to get in the rowboat and row it somewhere. It's not always. Absolutely. It's not always for other people.
So like when you're in the meat and potatoes of the writing, so to speak, like, do you have like a process that you do? Is there an outlining, or do you just jump in? Because I know how I work, and I'm always curious how other writers work. I kind of do my own thing, but I'd love to hear what your process is.
Well, I found I was not an outliner at first. I was a complete pantser, which is why I ended up throwing out like 1/3 of Norse code at some point, and why it took me like 4 or 5 years or whatever to write it. So I've become more of an outliner with every book. And then there's also just like the requirement that my editors want to see outlines before they sign on to a book.
Yeah.
So yes, I do have an outline. The outline can change, but I found like instead of just deviating from the outline, I will then go through the trouble of re-outlining. I like to have a map. Other than that, my process isn't really much of a process. It's just sitting down and figuring out what is the scene or the page or the chapter I need to write next, and focusing on that. I am not a binge writer. I write, if I'm really working on a book and I'm on a deadline, then I'm going to write 500 words a day, which for a lot of writers,
treat it like a shift. Yeah.
It's like a shift. Yeah. Well, I've been watching a lot of craft videos of people like making guitars or violins or anything. And what I've noticed about them is none of them are like, I am building a violin today. They're like, I am spending today just carving out this one bit. I'm focused on that. One little area. So instead of, and none of them are about speed either. And none of them praise themselves for like, wow, I sure like carved a whole shload of wood today. They're like, I just made that one little tuning peg perfectly, and like I'm going to spend the next week making 5 more of them or whatever.
And that is craft, and that is art. It is, the process itself is the process. Like it's not that you're trying to push it. You have to kind of let it breathe, I think. Right.
And you have to be intellectually and emotionally invested in the bit that you're doing. So that's what I focus on. Those 500 words, sometimes less. As long as I am focused on that and I'm invested, that's fine. Once I get to the point that it's like, now I'm just trying to hit a word count, I'm no longer emotionally or intellectually invested. I'm outcome invested, which is a different thing. And
so what do you do in that case?
I stop writing.
You stop.
I stop writing. When I start thinking like, I'm not caring very much right now about what I'm doing, I walk away. And I've had times where it's like, I've had times where it's like I wrote 5,000 words in a day for whatever reason, because I was on deadline and I felt
on fire, whatever it was happening. Yeah.
Right. I can guarantee you the next 4 days, I will not be able to get out a single word. So for me, it's counterproductive. Now I know another writer, and she writes a book in a month, and her work, you could put our books side by side, and you would not be able to say, Greg focused on 500 words a day. She wrote, 40,000 words in a month. That's just the way her process is and the way her brain works. And so much of writing is figuring out how your brain works, what your own psychology is, how you respond to the work that you're doing. And the only way I think to figure that out is by trying a bunch of different ways. Yeah. So when aspiring writers say like, are you a pantser or an outliner? I can answer like I'm an outliner, and I can tell you why I outline, but that doesn't mean at all that anybody else should be an outliner, because for the reasons I cite, they don't know if they're an outliner or a pantser until they've tried and failed probably several times at both those methods. And it can also change over time. Absolutely. I might become a pantser someday because, I'm a shapeshifter too. We're all shapeshifters.
Hey, absolutely. I think it's really important for writers, who are maybe getting stuck. And I don't believe in writer's block myself. I'm like you. I'm like, if I'm having trouble, just walk away and I'll come back another time. It's still in my head, so I'll come back to it and I'll work on something else. And so I kind of switch it up. And so I love that you're talking about how, this is a way that you can do it, but that is not like a prescription. That is not what, there isn't.
Absolutely not. That would be like me telling somebody how they should feel about everything else that they do. It's like this, I can't tell somebody how their brain ought to work. Exactly. Writer's block is interesting. Sometimes I teach a workshop on writer's block to a high school. I do.
That's great.
And what I do is I just redefine writer's block, because we define writer's block as you can't write. And I don't think it's that. I think it's like you are not enjoying the writing that is coming out of your brain. And you're not always going to enjoy it. Sometimes getting out of writer's block is doing work that you don't like, that you're not fond of. And for me, that's a lot. But sometimes it's also like, well, take a break, give yourself a break. But if you need to write, you can most people can find some way to write, right? No matter what. And it's just a matter of how you respond emotionally and psychologically to work that you are not enjoying doing.
So let's get this is sort of circling a topic I always like to ask writers. And what's the worst advice you've ever received for writing?
I don't know if this counts as advice or not, because like every piece of advice I've ever been given is probably true at some point in some context and some time. So the bad advice is just prescriptive blanket statement, but like show, don't tell. Yeah, that's good. That's really smart. Sometimes it's not. Write what you know. Yes, you should totally write what you know and don't write what you don't know. Sometimes. Other times, kill your darlings. Sometimes those darlings need to be clubbed. Sometimes those darlings are the best part of writing that make that writing yours.
Exactly.
But the worst thing somebody said to me about writing was my creative writing professor at college. You had to take, at UCLA, you had to take 3 terms of creative writing classes, and then you could count that as like an emphasis, like almost like a minor. And I took 2. One more would have been really easy, but I was fed up. So I gave a story. It was not science fiction because I was trying to write, I don't know, literary. But he said, like, it's like science fiction in that it's like farting through a keyhole. It's clever, but why bother? So I thought, like, well, that's completely unhelpful. It's snobbish. It's also using science fiction as not describing like tropes and forms and genre, but describing like just something you don't like is not useful. So, and the farting through a keyhole is clever, but why bother? Well, then I went and I read some of his work, and he was just blowing gas through keyholes for decades.
From his own experience, sounds like to me.
Yeah. I mean, he just kept a keyhole in his pants and he was blasting through it. So
the visual.
I know. That was the least helpful thing anybody's ever said to me. I also took an extension class on writing novels when I was still trying to figure out how to do it. And I just went up to the professor and said, like, I'm just having a hard time transitioning from short stories to novels. And he said, well, maybe you're just not a novelist. I'm like,
oh, you don't ever say that to somebody. No.
Well, also I paid you cash money for you to tell me that maybe I just can't do this because I can't do it now. So there are a lot of writers who are trying to earn some extra bucks, which I totally get.
Yeah.
But are not devoted to the obligation to help writers become the writers they need to be. Which is such a shame.
But on the flip side, what do you think is the best advice you ever got for writing, or that you could give?
Yeah. So I went to a writer's workshop, a week-long writer's workshop. And one of my instructors was Marina McHugh, who China Mountain Zhang and a bunch of other books. She's a fantastic writer. And she said, if you are obsessed about something, then it means you should probably write about it. So on large scales and small scales, but thematically and just the details, the bric-a-brac of books, I've adhered to that advice. So like in Weird Kid, I have been obsessed with how destructive and irresponsible large corporations are. Mm-hmm. So they tend to be the villain, and a villain is basically a force with power that means to do you ill. So the villains tend to be corporations in my last few books, because I'm really thinking a lot about that, as many of us are at this time.
Yes, I think so.
And then the other thing was, like, I really got obsessed with guitars, just looking at them, touching them, playing them. So Sweetwater, the online music store, I have a wish list. It is currently over $11,000 in guitars sitting in that wish list. So I gave Jake
some more books.
A lot of books, and hopefully never link my credit card to one-click buy, because
that
would be really bad. But I'd have so many beautiful guitars. So I gave Jake in Weird Kid, I gave him my guitar obsession.
That's cool.
And that was just a piece I put on the table in the first act. A lot of the first act for me is just putting pieces on the table. I don't know how they're going to play out. And then the other two acts are using the pieces I've put on the table and not trying to introduce new pieces. So I needed a way for him to basically fight the enemy. And I figured out a way to tie that in with guitar playing, so that it became like the kind of thing like, oh, guitars are there very deliberately. That's clearly an intrinsic part of the plot. Clearly that must have been there from the very beginning. And it wasn't. That was just a piece I put on the table that later I figured out, oh, I can utilize that. And a lot of times those pieces are just little things I'm interested in, little bits of stuff I put in my show and tell basket that I take out and put out on the table for people to see.
Well, that's wonderful. That's uniquely you too. And nobody else is going to have that secret sauce that you have, which is fabulous.
The secret sauce is just the stuff that you're obsessed with. That's what makes the book a personal expression, rather than just like extruded story meat format coming out of a tube.
Clearly I need to write about chocolate anyway.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, so like, we're kind of reaching the end of the talk, but I wanted to talk more about, are there any upcoming projects you want to talk about?
The one I can talk about is the book that's coming out next summer, because I finished copy edits on that a little bit ago. So that's mostly done.
Bravo.
And the cover hasn't been revealed yet, but I've seen the cover. It's beautiful. I love it. It's called Fenris and Mott, and it returns back to Norse code, my obsessions with Norse mythology and Ragnarok, but from a very different angle, because it's a middle grade book. It's about Fenrir, the wolf from Norse mythology, who eats the sun and the moon and kills Odin. But Fenrir, at this point, named Fenris, is a puppy who's been stranded on Midgard in contemporary times, and it's about a girl who rescues Fenris from a recycle bin, and then is tasked with two jobs: to prevent any harm from coming from Fenris, but also try to prevent the Ragnarok wolf, the embodiment of the end of the world, from doing harm. So
great. And
it's sometime next summer. It doesn't have a release date, but I would expect anywhere between July and September. I had a really fun time writing it. It was one of the books. I don't know if this will show in the outcome, but the process and the creation of it was really a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to that book coming out. And then I'm out of contract, Diane. So I'm in the process of pitching other books, and hopefully I can keep this scam going for a little while longer.
I have a feeling you're going to be just fine.
I hope so. I don't know. It's a tough
world.
I'm
excited for you. Well, this is a new chapter, right? So who knows what's going to happen next, but I think it's exciting.
I hope so. It's like we were talking, that uncertainty is is one of the big beasts we have to grapple with. And so being out of contract and having to sell another book, that's uncertainty. I don't know what shape my next couple of years is going to look like. Am I going to be able to keep this job as a writer for a couple of years? I'm going to have to scramble and figure out something else. And it's weird not knowing, but that's part of the job. And that's, if you can't deal with that, then, you have to figure out another way to be a writer. And
that's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Well, Greg, do you have anything that I haven't asked that you'd like to talk about before we?
No, this is thorough. This was great conversation and fun, and it's nice to talk. I've been doing a lot of for WordKit. A lot of promotion is talking to readers, most of them young readers. So it's also nice to actually talk about like the nuts and bolts behind the scenes, real world writing stuff. So this was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on Sci-Fi Author Chat, and I look so forward to all your upcoming works and adventures. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
Ad Astra.